Steve Martin rarely talks much about people, especially those who have passed away. He keeps quiet out of respect and to protect himself from old feelings. But this time is different. After more than half a century in the entertainment industry, Martin broke that silence to mention a name of whom he once said, "Without him, I wouldn't be here today." That person is no longer here. And it is this loss that makes Martin feel the need to say something he has not said in years. Not because the public needs to know, but because he feels it is time to pay an old debt. A big debt. The name of that debt is Tommy Smothers. Tommy Smothers was not the type of artist to follow a pre-established path. Even when American television was still shy about controversial topics, he decided to push the boundaries with seemingly harmless but deadly humor. In the 1960s, when the Vietnam War and political divisions were pushing America into social tension, Smothers and his brother Dick created a television phenomenon, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. The show was nominally a comedy show, but behind the light-hearted facade were a series of political, social, and protest messages, carefully woven into each skit. Born in 1937, Tommy had a troubled childhood after his father, an officer, died in World War II. When he grew up, he did not choose a military or political path, but instead entered the entertainment industry with his younger brother. Initially, the two performed folk music, but Tommy quickly realized that he could create something more powerful than music: comedy with a point of view. Thus was born the Comedy Hour, which became not only a place of entertainment, but also the first platform for social criticism on American television. In an era of tight censorship, Tommy was not afraid to touch on sensitive topics: war, free speech, the role of government. He aired characters like Joan Baez, Harry Belafonte, Pete Seeger, names that had been put on the no-air list because of their political views. He himself directly satirized President Lyndon B. Johnson in a skit, prompting CBS to come out and privately remind him. Smothers, though, did not back down. Instead, he frequently fought with the internal censors, demanding that the socially critical segments be kept. According to several writers on the show, Tommy once met with the show's director in private and declared bluntly, "If you want lame comedy, there are 100 other shows. But if you want real talk, I'm not changing." That stubbornness didn't last long. In 1969, but being one of the most watched shows, Comedy Hour was pulled from the air by CBS for violating its content guidelines. Tommy was dropped from the major networks. His reputation didn't disappear, but his opportunities were greatly diminished. What remained was a profound influence on a generation of writers, artists, and the way television viewed comedy. "I don't want to turn television into a political platform," Tommy said in an interview in the late 1990s. "I just think, if you've got a mic, at least use it to say something that's worth saying." His career continued on a smaller scale. A few shows, a few guest appearances on talk shows, a supporting role in the 2009 film The Informant. But Comedy Hour was a landmark and the beginning of many great careers. Among the show's writing team, the people who sat behind the scenes, shaping the lines, designing the skits, was a young face who was then unknown: Steve Martin. Martin was only 22 when Tommy picked him to join his writing staff. While others doubted his abilities, Tommy saw potential. Not only that, he gave Martin a chance to appear on air, a rare thing at the time, when writers were often invisible. Martin recalls that he didn't understand why Tommy had so much faith in me. At first, he thought he would just be on a trial basis for a few weeks. But Tommy not only kept Martin on, he encouraged him to try writing pieces that no one else on the team had thought of. Eccentric dialogue, Silly characters who appeared and disappeared in seconds. That was the kind of content Martin suggested, and Tommy approved. In writers' meetings, Tommy would often ask the final question, "Does it make people laugh? And if so, does it make them think?" It was this approach that made Martin feel not just a fledgling writer given a chance, but a true member of the creative machine. Tommy didn't work in a rigid hierarchy. He let his writing team develop ideas as long as they were in the spirit of what he was after: comedy with substance. But that freedom did not come without a price. CBS, which produced and aired the show, frequently demanded cuts or edits for politically satirical or sensitive content. Many times, skits featuring Martin were flagged for content that was not directly offensive. Martin had no position to negotiate or defend himself. The only person who stood up to argue with the censors on his behalf was Tommy. Martin never forgot those times. In an interview with Variety in early 2024, he recounted one specific situation. "CBS wanted to cut a piece I wrote. I was mentally prepared to be fired. But Tommy said in the conference room, 'If you're going to take Steve out, take me out too.' No one said anything back, and the piece went on air." That defense wasn't the only one. Many in the writers' room say Tommy often took the public responsibility so the team could develop their ideas freely. When asked why he took risks for unknowns, Tommy simply replied, "If I didn't do that, the show wouldn't exist." Not many people at the time saw the potential in Martin's unconventional style of performance. But Tommy not only supported him, he actively asked him to experiment more. Once, Martin said, he submitted a script that was so ridiculous that I thought I would be thrown out of the meeting room. But Tommy read it, laughed, and said, "Let's do it. At worst, we'll get yelled at." And sure enough, the skit did get yelled at. But Martin wasn't fired. Instead, he received a reminder from Tommy. "Next time, just write it so they won't dare cut it, but they won't understand it either." The freedom Martin received at Comedy Hour didn't come from the system. It came from an individual taking risks to protect creativity. Tommy Smothers spent the prime of his career paving the way for younger people like Martin, Rob Reiner, Bob Einstein. It wasn't a whim. It was intentional, a philosophy. Martin later mentioned this many times. In his autobiography, Born Standing Up, he wrote, "I used to think I was just lucky to be on Comedy Hour. But later I realized it wasn't luck. It was someone pulling me up and saying, 'Try it. I'll do the rest.'" At no other point in Martin's career was he as free and supported as he was when working with Tommy. Though he would go on to greater success, awards, and global audiences, in his memory, it all began in the writer's room in 1967. Where a mentor named Tommy Smothers showed him how to survive in an unforgiving industry. Two roads fork soon, Martin changed direction. He didn't try to join another protest show, nor did he continue his writing career. Instead, he turned to stand-up comedy. It was a completely different field. A performer standing alone in front of an audience, without a writing staff, without television censorship, without political themes. Just eccentricity and rhythm. Martin developed a quirky, clever style of performance that quickly captivated audiences across the United States in the 1970s. He became one of the top-selling comedians of his time and went on to conquer Hollywood with roles in The Jerk, Roxanne, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and many others. Martin's career exploded. He became a big name, with global influence. Tommy Smothers did not follow that path. He continued to perform with his brother, but he was no longer the same. After the CBS incident, most major networks distanced themselves from him. Sponsors were less interested in a man who had openly opposed national policy on air. Tommy continued to tour and perform, but on a smaller scale. He became an icon among ideological artists, but he was no longer a major figure on major television. Even though starting out on the same show, the two men took very different paths to survival. Tommy continued to speak his mind, regardless of the consequences. Martin chose to stay silent on politics, focusing on his technique and pure comedy. In the more than 3 decades since Comedy Hour ended, there are few records or photos of them keeping in touch. In his memoir, Born Standing Up, Martin wrote that he tried to avoid overt political statements because I wasn't sure I had the capacity to represent any point of view in any profound way. This is the fundamental difference between him and Tommy. While Tommy used laughter to question society, Martin used laughter to lead people away from it. Both were influential, but in opposite ways. From 1975 to the early 2000s, Martin barely mentioned Tommy Smothers in interviews. Not because of conflict, but because he was not in the habit of bringing up the past, especially with people whose views were so different. Tommy, in a private conversation in 2004, mentioned Martin as one of the things he was most proud of in his career. But that comment was never recorded or broadcast, and it is unclear whether Martin ever heard it. The distance between them seems to have grown over time. There have been no public statements from either of them about their relationship after Comedy Hour. Although they worked together, they have not appeared together in subsequent projects. Old photos, behind-the-scenes clips from 1968. That is all the public can find of the period when they were on the same side. But that silence isn't denial. It's more like a debt that's been set aside. In a 2017 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Martin, when asked about Comedy Hour, simply said, Tommy wanted his show to have substance, and he did, but it came at a price. It was short, but it showed that he was still watching from afar. After more than 30 years on 2 different paths, it seemed like they would never meet again. But a major event in the television industry created an opportunity for 2 names who were on the same roster in 1967 to reappear, the first and only time in the 21st century. Moments to remember. In 2008, the American Television Academy decided to give Tommy Smothers a special honorary Emmy, recognizing his pioneering contributions to freedom of expression and innovation on television. This was not an award that came from annual nominations. It was a way of correcting decades of silence for a figure who had been ostracized for saying too many of the right things at the wrong time. Surprisingly, the person chosen to announce and present Tommy with the award was none other than Steve Martin. Martin himself had suggested this to the awards ceremony organizers. In an email sent before the show, he said simply, "If he gets an award, I want to be the one to give it to him." It was the first time since Comedy Hour that the two had shared the stage together. When Martin stepped forward to present the award, he did not read his prepared remarks verbatim. He looked out at the room and said, "Tommy Smothers got me my first job. And when the system tried to get rid of him, he kept saying things that many people in this room would never dare say." The room was silent for a few seconds before breaking into applause. When Tommy accepted his award, he did not offer a formal thank you. Instead, he reiterated the spirit of Comedy Hour. Without naming any government, he alluded to the Iraq War and the censorship that still exists on contemporary television. "I talked about Vietnam. I don't need to say anything more today. You know what I'm talking about." That was enough to get the audience to stand up and applaud again, this time longer, more clearly. The event did not result in a reunion or a rekindling of the relationship, but it marked a rare moment in television when 2 people who had gone their separate ways were reunited not through a contract, not through a project, but through belated recognition. Martin said nothing more backstage, no press statements, but several people who were there said he took the initiative to sit next to Tommy in the waiting area. No one knows what they said. No one recorded or took pictures, but in the official photo lineup of the night, there was one. Martin putting his hand on Tommy's shoulder as he walked off stage. A simple gesture, but one that needed no explanation. A few days after the ceremony, an article in the Los Angeles Times called it a brief but timely tribute. The article said, Steve Martin didn't use words to tell his story. He just stood there with the forgotten and let the audience see what should have happened years ago. There was no second chance. After the 2008 Emmy, Tommy and Martin didn't appear together again. They didn't collaborate on new projects. They didn't do a couple interview. But that moment, a comedian at his peak and a man who had been eliminated from the game, was enough to fill a void that had lasted nearly 40 years. For Tommy, it was the last time he received formal recognition on national television. For Martin, it was the first time he stood before millions of viewers and said thank you publicly, without beating around the bush or ducking it. But it was only the beginning. It wasn't until Tommy was gone that Martin told the rest, the part he'd kept quiet for so long. Final thanks. On December 26, 2023, Tommy Smothers passed away at his home in California from lung cancer at the age of 86. The news was announced at noon that same day. But just a few hours later, Steve Martin posted a short message on the X account. No tags, no hashtags, no attached images. Just plain text, with the content, Tommy Smothers was the one who launched my career. I was young and had nothing, but he saw something and believed. His talent, his boldness in facing censorship, and his free spirit changed television forever. Thank you, Tommy. I will always be grateful. In just 24 hours, the post received more than 100,000 shares and nearly 500,000 likes. In the comments section, there were thousands of tributes from viewers, colleagues, and people who watched Comedy Hour or New Smothers through old shows. People like Rob Reiner, Albert Brooks, and Sarah Silverman also left comments expressing sympathy for Martin. Not long after, in an interview with Variety in early January 2024, Martin recounted for the first time a detail that had never been made public. During an internal meeting in 1968, CBS asked to cut a sketch he had co-written with Bob Einstein. Martin was silent, waiting for the decision to fire him. But Tommy Smothers told the executives one short sentence. "If that's cut, I'm not going to air it." That statement, Martin said, froze the room for nearly a minute. And then the sketch was kept. Martin tells the story without trying to make it sentimental. He doesn't pause for effect. He doesn't label Tommy a hero. He simply says, he didn't raise his voice like a controversial person. He just stood by the principles he lived by. And he didn't need anyone to validate that. When asked why he waited until now to share the story, Martin answered bluntly, "Because he can't hear anymore, and I don't want to keep it inside anymore." This was the first time Martin had called Tommy the unsung hero of American television. Throughout his career, Martin had avoided making strong emotional statements, but this time he made no attempt to duck. "For too long," he said, "I have been grateful in silence." Though they didn't see each other often after 2008, Martin said he kept up with Tommy's rare appearances, from small podcasts to Comedy Hour tributes. But he never called back, nor did he write. He admitted he never knew how to express gratitude properly. And speaking out after Tommy's death, he said, was not a belated gesture, but a form of closure. Their story has no climax, no personal conflict, no disagreements and reconciliations. It is a silent bond, initiated by an act at the right moment and lasting like a debt that the recipient always carries, even though no one asks for it. Not long after the interview, when asked about the biggest influence on his career, Martin mentioned only 3 words. Tommy Smothers. Simple as that. When Tommy died, there was no funeral, No live television coverage, no national memorial service. But in the television industry, many consider Steve Martin's tribute to be the most valuable. Not because it was written by a star, but because it came from someone who had been silent for so long and finally said the right thing. Not everyone gets to have their name mentioned on television nearly 60 years after being cut from the air. But Tommy Smothers did. And Steve Martin, at 79, did exactly what he had to do. Stand up in public, mention the name of the man who got him into the business, and assure millions that he still remembers. Tommy Smothers is not a man who likes to be praised, and Steve Martin has never been the type of artist to take credit for his work. But when someone who has been silent all his life finally speaks up, it is more than just a thank you. It is proof that some actions, even decades later, can still change the course of another person's life. If you feel this story deserves to be remembered, please like the video to help spread the word. If you watched Comedy Hour, loved Steve Martin, or simply believe in the power of doing the right thing, please share this video and leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to continue to hear real stories and get them told right.